How's it going, guys? Right now you're watching some of the God of War gameplay in the background, but this time around I got some questions and answers pretty much answered by the Cory Barlog, and it's one of the newest ones of the interviews he's done. And let's read out exactly what questions and answers he has mentioned. By the way, guys, I have not read this article yet, and pretty much it's live pretty much, so I'm going to be reading out questions and answers at the same time. So first experience on my part, and perhaps for you as well, guys. How do you evolve Kratos? The answer seems to be pair him with someone else, his son in this case. But according to director Cory Barlog, there were other ideas on the table when he first started sketching out his God of War revival. Some of the first stuff I was looking at the Kratos and his wife being in the center of the story, Barlog told US Gamer last week. But what I ended up with was mirroring my own life in having my son. While it doesn't seem to have been much more than early concept, it would have made for an interesting change in dynamics from the original trilogy. What would Kratos be like around a life partner who is in his equal? Maybe we'll get a glimpse in the final game. In chatting with Barlog and about God of War, we're also covered in the similarities with The Last of Us, and the optional areas with the thought times that Sony Santa Monica went through in the lead up to the God of War. Read on for a full interview. Something I found interesting in the similarities of The Last of Us in the road trip, the father and son bond, and that sort of thing. I was wondering if you could speak to that. Cory Barlog says, "It's interesting because I think it's the highest level you can look at the father and figure looking after their child as well, as the closer the camera angle. But for me, the game is so vastly different. Not to say anything negative about The Last of Us, because the game is amazing. But by the way, we handle Atreus and his gameplay relationship to the player is very different. It's very important for me to carve out our own identity in how we approach this game. I found it interesting that Kratos' second wife is dead, since his first wife died as a part of the original game's backstory. Why did you decide to go back to that thematic well, as if were anyway?" So Cory Barlog mentions this. "As I look at the Kratos and Atreus, to be able to tell a really compelling story about these two characters, not only from the mythological aspects, they had to be isolated. For Kratos to find some kind of emotional core, he needed to have a strong connection to a single character. Some of the first stuff I was looking at, it was Kratos and his wife being in the story, but what I ended with the mirroring my own life in having my son. You go through a lot of things during the process, and Kratos' past history of being pretty terrible father and also having a terrible role model for fatherhood. He has had no fatherly role models that help him understand what it is to be a father. So he truly liked myself feeling around in the dark anyway. Creatively, you don't know where you'll end up on any journey you go on, and you sort of hope that there are a light switch somewhere. For me, that was very important. I think a lot of people look at it cynically like it's a trope, and angst over the dead wife trope. I think it's terrible that people do that. What it says that you're not allowed to do in the story is in the way that you want to do it. It says that you're going to do the story in a way that I tell you to do it. What's interesting about this story is that you find out so much about the boy's mother throughout they speak. They act as a conduit for them to open up to each other. She's an invisible force that is the omnipresent and constantly there with them. I wanted Kratos to understand that part of how you grow is how you deal with grief. Kratos is like a machine. In some ways, everyone looks at Kratos. This is what we see. He's the one that I mentioned, rage. But there's so much more when you look at it from the different perspective. This one to me is looking into the depth of the individual and discovering what it would take to make Kratos actually legitimately have a true moment of humanity. What does that journey look like? When it was revealed back in January, there would have been no jump button. There was a lot of discussion about the decision. Could you tell me some of the subtle ways that it was removed? Removal has impacted the gameplay. So Cory Barlog, I'm guilty of this, and so I'm not criticizing anybody. But there's sort of a Pavlovian button pressing where you're rolling out and jumping, rolling and jumping, and they end up playing in the ways that totally annoying to the rest of the combat team. In God of War 2, meaning I would be playing the game, and they would be behind me, and I would be like, "Could you stop jumping?" And I couldn't. Pressing the X button was like a food pelt button for me. It kind of gives people a different sort of way to look at the game. Instead of moving from the encounter to encounter and jumping, you still have this two-stage input. The quick tap to get out of the way and double roll. Grounding it is that sense of saying that jumps exist in a certain context. But I think it's more freeing from a strategic standpoint because it creates a more decisive and measured approach to the gameplay. Jump combos are wonderful, and I was an advocate for them. When I arrived at God of War 1, there was no jump combat. There was no grabbing a guy in the air and slamming him to the ground. I added all that and I thought to put it into it. But as I looked at what we were going to do on this game, I realized that we don't necessarily need it. It's a great thing, it's fun, but doesn't tell the story of the gameplay perspective of somebody who's in a middle-aged god phase. He's more measured now, he's more thoughtful, and he's more strategic. We didn't slow the game down arbitrarily. We did it to show that he's more competent, he's smarter. Because when I return here, I realize that I made a decision in a different way. I'm older, I look at the world a different way. I'm surrounded with people who worked on God of War 1, who are old or older. We're marveled at the fact that that the way we used to make games was with a chip on our shoulder. Thumbs our nose at the man proved everything wrong. We have a little bit of that, but we also have wisdom. We've all seen so much more. It's richer because we understand more. There's a moment where I totally thought Kratos was going to twist an enemy's head off because he's done that in every other God of War, but instead he just breaks his neck. What was that show that Kratos has mellowed? Cory Barlog says this. There's a lot of circumventing expectations by suggesting that we're going one way, then going another. That's set to the tone that shows we're going to be looking at everything different. Even after the moments of breaking the neck, he's tired. He's still laying on the ground and collect himself, then struggles throughout the wall back. He's older and he hasn't gotten into fights like that in a long time, and he's kind of shaking off the cobwebs. He has to put an old face and he's worn before, but he needs to try and progress forward. Prior to this, he's been struggling, failing over and over again to control the monster inside him. All the previous games he's a monster 24/7, which is fine, but the reality is that there wasn't a single person out there who found that super compelling by the time we reached the 4th, 5th, 6th game. Is it fair to say that the old over-the-top Kratos is outdated now? Is that from the different era of the industry? Cory Barlog says this. I think Kratos is in his original incarnation reflected how we viewed things and the time period. The time period had not a lot of anti-hero icons, and it's kind of began something in a way. Over time I thought things change. They need to change. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. I don't think he should be either. But I think he's a lot of reflections of us. Who's David J was, who I was, who the team was. I think it's interesting because a lot of what we've done is also a little bit of a reflection of the industry. You look at the movies of the 20s, 30s, when they were kind of at the beginning. And then you look at the sophisticacy of the movies today. Look at some of the best examples of cinemas today and compare them to compare it to the complexity of the best movies of 30s. And you see that there's a growing willingness to look at the whole picture, opposed to being enamored with making movies with a sound and color. We don't have the advantage of having 120 years of history. We're still in the early days. We're in a tipping point where we're asking why we're doing something different. We're looking at context and actually challenging audience to experience a full range of human emotion. You previously alluded to being able to go back and fight optional bosses and explore different areas. What exactly would that look like? Cory Barlog says, I didn't realize that the optional bosses would be so incendiary. Someone was like, can you skip bosses? And I was like, sure. You can't skip actual main bosses, but as you go and explore the world, one of the main driving forces of exploration for me was rewarding curiosity. What I look about the video games is the idea that I discovered something, that I can go to work and be like, do you know what you could do this? You can do in this anyway? And they'll go home and try to find it in themselves. It's kind of weird chain letter that circulates at their experiment and finding something. But when it becomes so controlled and linear, everyone experiencing the exact same thing. I really wanted to create this world and felt not like any other open world, which is a term that I find charged with a lot of history. And that history comes from loading up an open world and finding a laundry list of tasks. The part that I don't want, the part that I like is what over there. The feeling if you go over the path and find something and you solve the puzzle of the open door, you can find an entire level that you might have missed. It's incredibly challenging to tell the team that they're going to work on something that most people will never find. Most people don't like that. They get very angry, and there's a fight, and you have to get them to trust you. Everything connects because it's exploration of a world. The world is kind of a character here, and as you branch off on a path, you discover about mythology. You find a backstory for a character you've been talking to, maybe a bit of information of the event you have only heard about tangentially. That sense of almost archaeologically uncovering bits of world and story is so rewarding within all video games. And I wanted to see if we could dig deeper and find as much as we could to wring every bit of fun out on every part of the world. Sony Santa Monica studio head Shannon Studstill said that the period before the new God of War was kind of dark time for the studio. I was wondering if you could speak to that. So Cory Barlog says, it was an interesting time to come to. I was just finished with Tomb Raider, and at the time I was set on the second Tomb Raider, but I realized that the first game was so good that I wasn't sure where I could go without completing it, changing things. So I had been discussing with Shannon for a while about having another God of War story in me. I wasn't sure what exactly it would be, but I knew I wanted to try something new. When I got back Santa Monica, other projects was in full swing, and when it didn't work out, it was hard for all of us. We had never experienced a level of getting knocked down. I do feel like we got knocked down twice. I felt a tremendous amount of responsibility because I had been part of the studio since basically the beginning. God of War 1 was when the studio really started to find its way, and I was a part of that. So much of the studio is part of my own creative legacy. It's important to me that we all stay on the path I feel we all want to be on. I don't ever want to relieve what we went through at that time. There were a lot of good people we don't get to work with anymore because we went and made some decisions that we probably look back on it and think we had to do better. That line, do better, has motivated us. There's no point in us worrying whether or not we did was good or bad. We just need to do better. We need to push. And every single day be true to that vision we had. Accessibility, pick up and play, fun. Deliver the promise of the back of the box. That's why the single player games are awesome. I still feel like I have that experience that I had in school where it would be like, I can't wait to get back home. I'm going to get transported into this whole other world. The fantastic fantasy movies from the 80s are still inspirations like the Never-Ending Story. People look at me funny when I say it's an inspiration and are like, but that's the kids' movies. And I'm like, no, it's an amazing movie. It's an amazing complete world that's painting this fantastic picture of a world we don't know. Legend, Labyrinth, Ladyhawke, and any movie from the 80s that had an L in it. These movies were formative to me, and they still inspire me. Alright guys, well that was the whole article. God damn, this is quite long. I did not expect it to be this long, but still, as I have my input on this, I feel like this is a very good direction for them to go at. I'm sure that he has mentioned that it's quite different ways of putting it, and in a lot of ways they had darker times twice. In fact, they had pushbacks of the game that they were trying to develop, the one we're seeing right now. And I mean, I have no doubts that the game's gonna be really damn great. Me personally, I cannot wait to get my hands on it and play the shit out of it. But it's all to say, I'm very excited. Hopefully you guys are as well. Anyway, it's gonna be a good road ahead of us for sure. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys later. Have an awesome day and peace out.